I'm very grateful, perhaps, and I'm honored to be among you, together with highly qualified scholars of the Reformation. Short introduction, where I'm coming from. The part of land I came from is a part of Romania today. That's Transylvania. I was just about to ask you whether you have ever heard about Transylvania, but suddenly came in mind that you certainly have, because this is the land of Dracula. So, but I want to put in a picture more by saying that this part of land, Transylvania, is a part of Romania, but in Reformation time, it was a part of the Hungarian kingdom. For centuries, it had been a constituent part of the Hungarian kingdom up to 1920, when Hungary was cut in pieces. After the Triangle Treaty, the western part of the country went to Austria, the northern part went to Slovakia, the southern part went to former Yugoslavia, and the eastern part went to Romania. Someone told by joke that Hungary was literally circumcised. It's the only country that neighbored itself. And that part of Transylvania, when I'm speaking about at that time of the Reformation, is a part of Hungary. As being a part of Hungary, it is the final frontier of the Protestantism, and also the edge of the Western type Christianity too. So this is the principal part of the Hungarian kingdom I'm going to speak about. And let's start with another introduction about the little influence of Zwingli. No question that the time span between the year 1557 and 1571 is the most intriguing period of the Transylvanian Reformation. It is the era in which, as a result of theological disputes, the churches of the Reformation are formed and granted legal recognition. 1557 marks the year of establishment of the Lutheran Church. 1564, the Reformed Church. And 1571 emerged one of the rarities of the European Reformation, namely the Unitarian Church. This period of the Reformation in Transylvania is characterized by the multitude of polemical writings and debates also. The country's liberation from Habsburg rule in 1556 was the main event that triggered these polemics. Between 51 and 56, Transylvania lost much more than its mere independence. These few years are regarded as the first era of counter-reformation, during which the Catholic Church attempted to reinforce its position and thus ban all theological dispute by state orders. The polemics of the years following the liberation in 1556, however, sped up the process of division of the different denominations. An interesting fact is that the break line of this division was among the two different ethnical communities in Transylvania. The German-speaking Saxons, ministers, remained true to Luther, whereas the Hungarian pastor turned to the Swiss stance. In 1556, at the beginning of theological disputes, the Saxons and Hungarian pastor still formed one community. Nevertheless, some of the Hungarians already professed Zwingli's view on the Holy Communion. In 57, the situation changed. During their synod in Hermannstadt, CDU today, the Saxons confessed to the teachings of Luther and keeping the church order issued in Saxony, Germany. They severely censored the teachings of Zwingli, Öcolampadius, and Calvin. On June of the same year, they held another synod in Klausenburg, where they passed judgment on their Hungarian colleagues, followers of Zwingli. Kalmanchahi was the chief leader of the Zwinglian, and Zwingli's shadow in Transylvania fell ill and was not able to attend the synod. So he pleaded with one of his colleagues to stand up and defend their case, who, however, was not willing to take up a debate on his own. In their decision, the synod condemned Zwingli's follower for his absence and pronounced the Hungarian Zwinglian ministers heretics. Transylvanian Saxon ministers issued a creed against the Zwinglian doctrine of the Eucharist and proclaimed that the position of the Wittenberg Church is the only authority in the matter. Unfortunately, Kalmanchahi, the leader, died in December that year, 57. Therefore, Zwingli's doctrine could not gain ground in Transylvania. However, the seed that he had planted would soon sprout. It is widely not accepted among the church historians that the spreading of Swiss theology in Transylvania is closely tied to the work and doctrine of Bollinger. He is the one who followed in Zwingli's footsteps through the correspondence he carried out with Hungarians. Implicitly, he succeeded in making ready the ground to Calvin's teaching, which, according to the result of the latest research, were prevalent in Transylvania from the middle of the 16th century. Previously, it was believed that Calvin's teaching had not been known till the middle of the 17th century. Bollinger's impact, therefore, was most powerful at the time of formation of the Reformed Church in Transylvania between 57 and 64. Not much later, the Second Helvetic Confession takes up the lead role. The importance of the Second Helvetic Confession. The Helvetic Confessions both appear at the most fitting time, both in Europe and in Hungary. The first Helvetic Confession arose in Europe when the unity of certain Swiss cantons had to be established over against other cantons that remained true to the teaching of the medieval church. The importance of this first creed, therefore, is local and almost completely restricted to Switzerland. As we know, the Second Helvetic Confession was written by Bollinger as his own testament and later received wide publicity when Elector Frederick III was in need of Protestant support for defending his faith at the Imperial Convention. Thus, the Second Helvetic Confession achieved its original purpose. However, it did not live up to the task of establishing the political unity of European Protestantism. We don't have to be sorry for it, because it has brought about greater and longer-lasting result than of securing the confessional unity of the Reformed churches on the continent. This confessional unity is evident from the significant number of Reformed churches in Europe which accepted the confession as their basic creed. The front page of the 1568 edition is a proof of this fact. As far as Hungary is concerned, evidence suggests that one of the church districts adopted the confession early as 1567, much sooner than the Transylvanian church. Moreover, since representatives from other church districts also attended that synod, it is safe to assume that the influence of the confession spread throughout all Hungarian Reformed churches. The Hungarian translation of the Second Helvetic Confession. The first Hungarian translation was published a few decades later, also in due time. The question that I came up with a few years ago when I finished translating the work of Calvin, the institution, is very much relevant in this matter. Why was, at the beginning of the 17th century, a need for a Hungarian translation when the community of ministers and seminary students mastered the Latin language? Well, the answer given in this case of the institution applies to this situation as well. Both translations were necessary on account of the ever stronger attacks of the Counter-Reformation and its harsh critique on the Reformed Church. Thus, the translation process of the Second Helvetic Confession became part of the defense strategy against the assaults of the Counter-Reformation, by means of equipping mainly the Reformed nobility, but church members also, with the necessary spiritual ammunition. It is widely known that the main leader of the Counter-Reform in Hungary, Peter Pazman, targeted primarily the Reformed nobility. Therefore, it was crucial today that they be strengthened in their beliefs. So both the Hungarian translation of the institution and of the Second Helvetic Confession at the beginning of the 17th century served this purpose. So the Second Helvetic Confession in Transylvania. A theory of the post-synods of the Transylvanian Reformed churches in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries did not explicitly refer to the Second Helvetic Confession as the official creed of the church. It nevertheless became its basic confession and a vital part of Hungarian Reformed church life in Transylvania. From the newly excavated and published synodal records of the time, I collected more than 10 arguments supporting the theory formulated before. I will present only some of them to keep up with the time schedule. Second Helvetic Confession and the pastoral ordaining. Section 93, the law book of the law book issued by the Reformed Church in Transylvania in 1649, disposes national synods to be assembled by the bishop. He is required to send out invitation in due time, specifying the topics of the dissertation presented by the candidates for ministry and the thesis assigned for public debate. Such invitation survived from 1681. The earliest document was written by Bishop Prof, who marks chapter 3 and chapter 4 of the Second Helvetic Confession as topic of debates. Following this synod, the two chapters became the pillar of the pastoral exam for decades. In 1772, the Supreme Governing Body suggested that candidates be required to study the entire confession, not only 2 chapters. They also proposed that there be more invigilator applied for the surveillance of the exam. The reason for the suggestion was partly the growing influence of the Enlightenment, partly the Habsburg Counter-Reformation. In the invitation to the Synod held on May 1779, there is clear evidence that the candidates are required to prepare the entire Second Helvetic Confession for examination. Ex toto corpore Helvetici confessionis. Moreover, the relevance of the creed is further reinforced by the decision of the Supreme Governing Body in 1791, namely that candidates who passed the examination are to purchase the two fundamental creeds, the Heidelberg Catechism and the Second Helvetic Confession, and to present their pastoral ordainment to the Synod. It has been a tradition ever since to read aloud chapter 25 of the Second Helvetic Confession as an admonition and guidance for the new minister. Even today, we practice that. Well, it's actually the seminary. The Second Helvetic Confession and the sermons at the Synod. Reference made to the Second Helvetic Confession in sermons spoken at synods further affirms its appreciation. It is highly likely that pastors who delivered the opening and closing sermon at the synod have chosen the text from the Bible in accordance with the two passages which had been assigned for exam and for debate. The very first evidence on this dates back to 1761 when a dean preached Juxta caput Helvetici confessionis Dezső. Well, according to the 10th chapter of the Helvetic Confession. In the previously mentioned decree of 1772, the Supreme Governing Body also ordered the bishop to advise the pastors assigned to preach at the synod to consider the two chapters pointed out for the exam when they chose the biblical text for their sermon. In fact, the invitation letter to the synod of 1779 clearly specified that the opening sermon should be based on chapter 20, whereas the closing sermon on chapter 21st of the Second Helvetic Confession. This tradition was observed till the very end of the 18th century. The Supreme Governing Body has decided to have these sermons printed out. Therefore, they ordered the bishop to collect and deliver them for this purpose, I mean the sermons. The pastoral oath of allegiance when they were ordained. The pastoral oath, surviving from the 17th century, make no reference whatsoever to the confession. This is understandable, considering this, that the synod had not yet accepted it as an official document. There are, however, a few exceptions to the rule. One of them is the text of a pastoral oath from the same diocese or classis. At the ordination, the pastors had to make a vow that apart from the writing of the prophets, the apostles, and the evangelists, they would teach and preach according to the truth of the Second Helvetic Confession. This addition to the pastoral oath is outstanding because one can find no evidence in either the bishops or the dean oath. The students' oath of allegiance. The synod held in 1730 drafted an oath of allegiance for the students planning to travel abroad for their studies. The text of the oath is as follows. I swear that I shall not adhere to heretical or unorthodox studies, namely the teaching of Arminius and Universalism. Instead, I will study the object in accordance with the teaching of the Second Helvetic Confession and the Heidelberg Catechism, and proclaim nothing but these upon my return home. In 1735, however, two such persons, or pastors, returning from studies abroad, were found guilty in teaching universalism. The Synod ordered them to take a special oath which featured parts from the Second Helvetic Confession. I quote, "I swear to the living God, his Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that from now on I shall believe and proclaim the teaching on grace as they appear in the Heidelberg Catechism and the Second Helvetic Confession. I completely disavow any beliefs, particularly the doctrine of universalism, that is inconsistent with these." The Second Helvetic Confession and the school curriculum. The Synod of 1791 set out as its main purpose to fight back the theories of the Enlightenment and the Counter-Reformation. And as such, it passed harsh judgment on the curricula of two Transylvanian reform schools. In one of these institutions, in the curriculum appears the dogmatic of Marble theologian Samuel Enderman, who was highly influenced by the philosophy of Wolff, universal grace, natural theology, partial deprivation, and so on. Referring to national legislation, the Synod ordered the schools to lay aside the doctrine of Enderman and teach nothing but the Helvetic Confession. Thus, the Confession became an important part of the official curriculum in all Transylvanian high schools. Conclusion. The historical data presented above clearly indicate that the Confession had a vital part in church life in the 17th and 18th century, while the Heidelberg Catechism played a major role in educating the congregation and the children in matter of faith. The Second Helvetic Confession was more significant in the formation and instruction of future clergymen. Therefore, it was not so much through the Synod decree that it became widely accepted in the church, rather through the process of pastoral education and training. Thank you all for your attention.